everyone. Welcome to the latest GeoTalks Express session series. Very special one today, and indeed it also kicks off our academic month here at Blue Marble Geographics. We're delighted to be going through the month of August talking about the use of our software in education, and we're kicking that off with this presentation. A little bit of a different focus for us because we're kind of handing the presentation baton to a number of invited guests. As you will see, we're going to be hearing from a number of teachers, some students, about how they are using GlobalMapper in the classroom. That is the plan for our presentation today. Before we get started, a few housekeeping issues. I know many of you are probably long-time attendees of our webinars, but for those of you who are new, a few things to note here. You are in listen-only mode. Obviously, you can hear my presentation. I'm hoping you can hear my presentation. Unfortunately, we can't hear you, but if you have questions, over on the right side of your screen, you'll see a questions panel. Now, a little bit different than normal. If you have questions about any of the content of our presenters' presentations, we will forward those to the presenters. These are going to be recorded sessions, and we will send your questions to the appropriate presenters so that they can answer them more directly in an email to you. But use that questions panel, again, over on the right side of your screen to ask any questions that you may have of our presenters. The session is being recorded. You will get a notification hopefully in the next few days. You can go back and revisit this, maybe share it with some of your colleagues. Obviously, if you're watching the recording of this, you've already figured that out. This is going to be uploaded to YouTube probably before the end of the week. We'll get that up there. A couple of kind of housekeeping issues in regard to some of the upcoming events. Our GeoTalks Express series is continuing. A couple of exciting ones coming up towards the end of this month, actually, August 25th. We're going to have a little bit of a roundtable discussion with some of the folks here at Blue Marble about our upcoming release, version 23. This is a little bit of a different release because we are changing the structure of the application itself. GlobalMapper has had an accompanying LiDAR module. We're changing that. We're introducing a new product called GlobalMapper Pro. Those of you who are interested, this will give you an opportunity to hear a little bit about what's going on with that. So to sign up for that one, August 25th, towards the end of September, after the actual release of that product, we'll have a more structured what's new session. We'll introduce some of those new tools. And in October, the following week, we'll introduce GlobalMapper Pro, our brand new product. That will be the focus of our October session. Information about these is available on the website. You'll see in the URL at the bottom there. Registration is required. Go ahead and sign up for those sessions. So again, today our focus is going to be on the use of GlobalMapper in the classroom. Now, we reached out to a number of representatives of different academic institutions, asking them to provide us with a little bit of a story about how they're using GlobalMapper. And the speakers, we have four, are going to include Tori Johnson. She is Director of Geographic Information Systems, the GIS Lab, University of Maine, Machias, a little bit further east from where I'm sitting right now, over towards the Canadian border. We're going to hear from Kelsey Schwind. Kelsey is actually one of the winners of our scholarship program. Kelsey's been doing some very interesting work with GlobalMapper at Texas A&M. She is a doctoral candidate, and she's going to share a little bit about how she's incorporated GlobalMapper into her work. Richard Friedman, adjunct instructor in the GIS and technology program at San Juan College in Farmington, New Mexico, a longtime user of GlobalMapper. He claims he's been using GlobalMapper since the late 90s. That would put him kind of high up on the experience list. So we're going to hear a little about Richard's experience in the San Juan College in Farmington. And then we're going to hear from Santiago Medina from Argentina, who does a lot of things. He's a former military officer. He's a mountaineer. He also conducts classes in the development of maps within GlobalMapper. So obviously a little bit different in terms of the teaching experience, but nonetheless an interesting use case for using GlobalMapper in a teaching environment. So those folks we will hear from in just a few minutes. Before we begin, I want to point out some of the other events that are coming up in this academic month. You will note the URL at the bottom of the screen if you want any more information about these programs. Some of them will require registration. Please go ahead and visit that website and you'll get all of the information about our academic month. We have a workshop coming up. I'm very excited to be hosting a workshop this day next week, 1 week from today. It's a 3-hour workshop, 2 o'clock to 5 here on the Eastern time zone, US time zone, free of charge, open to to anybody who teaches GlobalMapper or is interested in teaching GlobalMapper. We're going to go through some of the basics of the software from the point of view of teaching it in a classroom situation. We're also going to be talking a little bit about our academic curriculum in that session. So if you're interested, again, feel free to sign up. I put a shortened URL here. This goes directly to the registration page for that. I'll pause briefly while you grab a pen and jot that down. If you miss this, don't worry. That in the URL at the bottom of the screen, which you'll see at the end of our presentation as well, has all of the information about this and the other events. So our workshop coming up next week. We have a geo-challenge and it has started. I just checked in this morning. We got a few participants already. It's a quiz. We want you to identify some features in the world. A simple little quiz, and the winner will receive a copy of GlobalMapper Pro. We'll select a winner, those who get all the answers correct, and you'll receive a copy of our upcoming release of GlobalMapper Pro, scheduled for release towards the end again of next month. Again, URL here. This is a shortened version. You can get a link on the Blue Marble website if you miss jotting this one down. I'll just pause briefly while you grab your pen. So again, share it with your colleagues, share it with your students. Again, a copy of our GlobalMapper application is up for grabs. The GlobalMapper Curriculum, I mentioned earlier, we will be talking a little bit about these labs in our workshop. Many of you are using these already to help you with the instruction of GlobalMapper and indeed the introduction to some of the principles of GIS. We have expanded these. It's actually a work in progress. We're finishing up some of the final to-do items in this. These will be available next week. I think we're going to make an announcement next week about their availability. They're free. If you're teaching GlobalMapper or interested in teaching GlobalMapper, you can request a copy of these. There are 12 covering various aspects of the software, watershed generation, contour generation, et cetera, a lot of point cloud processing workflows in there. We give you data, we give you instructions. You can use those in your school to help with that instruction process. Again, look out for an announcement next week about the updated availability of those lab materials. I want to mention a little bit about our licensing program as well. It's something we will be reminding you about throughout the course of the month. Those of you who are in the US and Canada, you can use GlobalMapper or our other application, Geographic Calculator, at no cost for teaching or in a classroom situation. Your students can install it on their computers as well. This is something that took us a long time to kind of formulate, this idea of providing simple access to our software. We had many meetings with academic faculty over the years, and this was the plan that we implemented a few years ago to remove the license restriction when it comes to using our software. So you can use it for free. Now, those of you who are outside of the US, we do offer a very deeply discounted licensing program. So feel free to get in touch. Provide some information about who you are, and we'll set you up with that license. Again, a URL here if you want some more information on the free licensing that's available to you if you're within the US or Canada in an accredited academic institution, or indeed if you're outside the US, some of the other options that are available. Our scholarship was announced several weeks ago. We will again be reminding you about this throughout the course of our month and indeed beyond. It will be running throughout the course of the autumn semester. Students are encouraged to participate, both undergraduate and graduate students. We're looking for a written thesis, a project report, or a poster, something of that type that incorporates the use of GlobalMapper or indeed Geographic Calculator as an alternative. If you submit that, you will be in the running to receive a $500 scholarship, and indeed we're throwing in a copy of our GlobalMapper Pro as well. So if your students want to participate, again, you can go to the academic programs page on our website to get information on how that submission process works. So back to today, our speakers, and again, we have 4. I mentioned Tora being our first speaker. A little bit more information about Tora. As noted here, she is the director of the GIS lab at UMaine Machias. She also serves as the chair of the Division of Environmental and Biological Sciences. She's been there for quite a while. Her geospatial research focuses on supporting sustainable and prosperous rural communities. There's a lot of collaboration with the University of Maine campuses and their local communities. And Tora is actually going to share a little bit of that information, how the university reaches out to the community and involves her students in that process. Tora's also a writer. She has written a book, Entanglements, The Intertwined Fates of Whales and Fishermen, and was released in 2005. And she serves on the Community Resilience, Public Health and Emergency Management Working Group of the Maine Climate Council. So I'm going to switch over and we're going to play our presentation here of Tora's presentation. Again, if you have questions for Tora, feel free to pop them in the questions panel and we'll make sure that Tora receives them and follows up with you directly.
Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Tora Johnson. I'm the director of the GIS Lab and Service Center at UMaine at Machias. I'm also the chair of the Environmental and Biological Sciences Division here. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about our programs and how we use GlobalMapper in our work with students in our courses. Before I get started, I want to mention that there's a link to this presentation as well as a QR code if you'd like to access the information that I present here. And also, here's my contact information. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions or want to know more about our programs or how we use GlobalMapper. So first of all, just really quickly, I want to mention that we have a whole series of stacked programs, meaning one leads into another in geographic information systems, starting with early college certificates. We have certificates for adults and GIS applications, and as well as an advanced certificate. We also have a bachelor's of science degree in geographic information science, as well as 4+1 programs where you can complete a master's degree in just 1 year after your bachelor's program. Our environmental GIS program is new. It's starting this fall, so we are accepting new students into this new program. It has 3 concentrations: municipal applications, ecological applications, and spatial data science. So that allows people to sort of choose whatever direction they want to take it. As you know, GIS is a really broad field, but the focus is really primarily environmental applications of GIS. I will say that the programs, all our programs here, all of our GIS courses are very hands-on, very applied, and that is where GlobalMapper really comes in. And we are linked to the U.S. Department of Labor's Geospatial Technology Competency Model, so our whole program is framed around that. Many folks have gone through our GIS application certificate programs. We have 2, and again, they're stackable. So we have just a standard certificate, which is 15 to 16 credits. Typically, people finish that in about 2 to 3 or 4 semesters. It depends on how many classes you want to take at once. And then you can add a few more classes on top of that to get our advanced certificate. Now, a really important aspect of our program is the GIS Service Center that we operate here at UMaine at Machias. That's where I am right now. And we founded it in 2004. And the idea is that students perform projects for community partners, and it allows community capacity building while students gain real world experience. And it's really the core of all the projects that I'll present today. We have many partners. I'm not going to get into the long list, and this is just a few of them. But it's a really critical aspect of what we do that allows our students to apply their work to real world problems. Now, the way we use GlobalMapper in GIS courses is by and large 3D visualization and LiDAR. We find it is our go-to tool for those applications, and we find that our students, when they go off into the workforce, use GlobalMapper for those purposes a lot. And we typically teach them how to, we sort of introduce them to the technology using GlobalMapper tutorials. We find them to be very effective, and they also form good reference materials. So if you haven't used them yet, I encourage you. In fact, I use the tutorials to kind of teach myself how to use the software, and I'll go back and access them. And these are the courses we use GlobalMapper in. Our GIS2 course Typically, it's not a core software in that course, but a lot of the students use LiDAR data and do 3D visualization, and we find it's the best tool for that purpose. It's front and center in remote sensing. Many of the students in our applied projects and community applications are advanced project capstone courses. They pretty much always use GlobalMapper. It's really a primary tool in those courses. So it's become really invaluable for us over the years. And now I'm going to show you some of the projects that students have done. So this is Andrew Howland, and I'm going to explain a couple projects that he's done using GlobalMapper. This is part of a sort of specialty that we have looking at coastal resilience in this in the Down East region. And so Andrew, a few years back in 2017, as part of a class project, I think it was GIS 2. Actually, I think it was GIS 1 that he did this project, and then used GlobalMapper and GIS 2 for the visualization piece. He launched an app, a citizen science app that asked folks from around the region to submit photographs of king tide flooding, so flooding of the highest annual tide of that year. I believe it was in mid-December. And we had over 100 people submit king tide photos, and he was able then to use these photos to map and create 3D visualizations using GlobalMapper of king tide inundations. So this is a visualization. The red dot is where the king tide level was based on at least one of the photographs. I think in this particular location there were several showing the king tide level. And so you can see where that level is, still water, no storm surge or anything like that, where that water is all along the shore of downtown Machias. If you've ever been to Helen's, this is Helen's right here. And this is the causeway that we call the dike that goes across the Middle River. And so he was able then to use GlobalMapper to map this tidal height and then flood the scene. So this is a base flood elevation, 10.7 foot flood. You can see some of the water's coming up in through the downtown. We've had at least 4 floods of this level over the last 6 years. So this is no longer a base flood, no longer a 100-year flood. This is getting to be more frequent with sea level and storm surges as they rise. 12.7 foot, so base flood +2, base flood +4, and base flood +6. And so the town of Machias has been using this information and these visualizations to make some decisions about how they're going to harden the shore, raise the dike, and protect the wastewater treatment plant here. And so this has been a really crucial piece. Here we have some nicer images because this is a more recent version of GlobalMapper used in this project. This was done last fall by Mitch Dumas. He was part of our remote sensing class in the fall. And he used LiDAR data with GlobalMapper to create coastal inundation models for the city of Calais. I'll go ahead and show you an example of that. So as you can see, this is in GlobalMapper. You can see that Mitch has compiled all the LiDAR data and then colorized it using an aerial image. And then he was able to use 3D. So if I switch over to 3D, we can now see the Calais shoreline. And we can zoom in, we can scooch around, we can add 3D exaggeration, and we can flood the scene virtually. And this allows folks in the community to see which areas are most prone to flooding. You can see there's, I believe the wastewater treatment plant, I think is over here. There's the town pier over here is seeing flooding impacts. And this allows them to see these impacts in 3 dimensions with a colorized image that that lets them understand what different scenarios would look like for their community. Here's another example that I'll show you. So Leonard Lake is a an impoundment created by a dam, so this lake right here, in the town of Ellsworth, Maine. The dam is currently over 100 years old. It blocks fish passage, and the Down East Salmon Federation, one of our community partners, had hired Copeland Associates, a landscape architecture firm, to help them create visualizations. You see a couple of them here, showing what the dam would look like if it were to be removed, and that is a goal that they have for this dam. Copeland and Associates wasn't really able to work with the 3D data, and so they brought us in to help them. And Avery Davis, one of my students, for his capstone project this spring, decided to work with them to provide them with the 3D visualizations they needed. It was a complex project, and I'll show you why. And he used GlobalMapper to do it. So here we have in GlobalMapper, this is the current Leonard Lake footprint. And what Avery was able to do was, if I turn off the current Leonard Lake, he was able to take bathymetric measurements, so depth measurements from the lake that were provided by the Maine Geological Survey, and he was able to merge those with LiDAR data for the region. He was also able to create new pretend LiDAR points for the area where the dam would be removed. So here's the dam here. So he created new pretend LiDAR points with the new lake bed as it would appear based on historical imagery and historical accounts and maps of the region. He then was able to create a single digital elevation model, which I'll show you here. So a seamless digital elevation model showing what the lake would look like, what the region would look like without the dam in it. And then he was also able to model streams, so you could see what the streams, how the stream tributaries would come into the resulting river, the Union River. And then he was also able to put that together with, and of course, visualize it in 3 dimensions, so folks could see what, let me do that again, so folks could, yeah, so folks could see what the river would, didn't do that right. So folks would see what the river would look like with the dam removed. And so this has been a really important step, and he was able to provide this 3-dimensional, the digital elevation model data to Copeland Associates that they did not really have the ability to put together themselves, so that they could then create the visualizations that you see here. So they could do cross sections and really give folks an idea of what this would look like using their drafting tools. And so it was a great sort of collaboration that gave Avery Davis a really fantastic capstone project, and that he can now use in his portfolio as he moves on to apply for employment. A couple of other examples of how we've used GlobalMapper in the classroom. So this is a project looking at living shoreline suitability, where all these students are performing an analysis based on a method provided by the Maine Geological Survey, where they're looking at the suitability of putting green infrastructure, so plantings and pervious surface rather than impervious surface along the shoreline to protect against erosion. What we needed for this process was a digital elevation model that included the depth, the depth profile of the bay, but also up onto the shore, and that didn't really exist. And so Colleen Hendricks, this student, was able to take LiDAR data and use GlobalMapper to merge the LiDAR data with the digital elevation, with the bathymetry data to create a seamless digital elevation model. It's hard to see here in the image, but you can see the model goes all the way up on shore. I believe it's 100 feet beyond the shoreline, so that we could analyze the slope and the aspect and various other aspects of the shoreline for this living shoreline suitability study. And then one last project that I'll highlight. This was a project that involves several students, and they're all pictured here, but the one I'm interested in is this one. This is Jillian Dow. She was at the time a student in our marine science program taking GIS courses. And this was an internship she did in the summer, I believe, of 2019, and called the Western Passage Research Collaborative, looking at Passamaquoddy Bay. That's way down east, right on the border between Canada and the US, off of Eastport, Maine. So this is the peninsula here. And what we needed was another one of those seamless digital elevation models that included the bathymetric, the sub tidal areas, as well as the land. And so that was part of Jillian's project. Here you can see it with an overlay of an aerial photo. So you can see that she was able to create a seamless elevation model by using GlobalMapper to knit together LiDAR data and bathymetry data, both from the US and Canada, as well as shoreline data. And she was able to put together a seamless 3D model of the Passamaquoddy Bay in that region. And this is allowing folks to really, really understand better a whole variety of things, including the potential for power generation subtidally, a whole variety of physics questions that they're trying to work out about tides and currents, as well as plants and animals that live in the region. So it was a really valuable project. And so that's just a few of the ways that we use GlobalMapper in our work here at UMaine Machias, and how it's incorporated into course projects. I'm happy to hear from anybody who's interested in our programs or how we use GlobalMapper, and thanks for listening.
Well, thank you, Tora, for sharing your information about what your students are doing. I think it's interesting when that Tora is telling us the kind of the idea of her using GlobalMapper in a classroom, but also applying that in a community sense, working with community organizations. So it's really gratifying to see the tools being used to solve some of those community problems. Again, down East Maine, those of you looking for a geographic perspective, kind of as far east in the United States as you can go before you get into Canada. So if you have questions for Tora about Tora, I mean, she shared her email address. You can also use that questions panel. Again, we'll pass those questions on to Tora. Some of you noted you could not hear at the start. I apologize. I'm not sure why. We'll try to figure out if there's anything on our end we can do to adjust that. Hopefully you're hearing me. Fear not, because we are recording this. We'll give you a link to watch the recording. We'll make sure the recording has the full audio in there. So if you do miss any of these, we will provide the recorded video for you. Somebody mentioned the GlobalMapper tutorials. Tora referenced those as well. Those are the lab materials I referenced in one of my introductory slides. If you can be patient till next week, we'll make a general announcement about their availability. The current versions are being updated right now. We'll have a few more in there. So the tutorial materials will be available to you. Just, again, look out for that announcement next week. Our next presenter is Kelsey Schwind. Those of you who maybe have been in previous presentation may have actually heard from Kelsey already. She is one of our scholarship winners from a couple of years ago. I think she won the scholarship, did some really interesting work along the Gulf of Mexico, and she's going to share a little bit about that as well. Now, we invited Kelsey because she kind of comes at GlobalMapper from a different perspective. She's a doctoral student. She has done some teaching, but she is still kind of in the student body. She is, as I noted, a doctoral student pursuing a degree in coastal marine system sciences at Texas A&M. That's in Corpus Christi, again, the Gulf Coast of Texas. Currently, her work focuses on fusing remotely sensed data and using GIS for the purpose of monitoring coastal processes. Her previous research while attending the University of Alabama and Texas A&M included use of GIS and geocoding, using volunteered geographic information, VGI, and conducting drone-borne LiDAR surveys for forest biomass estimations. She's taught environmental science and physical geography courses as well. So with my hope that the sound will cooperate this time, let's hear from Kelsey about some of the work that she has been doing.
All right, hello everyone. My name is Kelsey Schwind. I am a doctoral student at Texas A&M University Corpus Christi, and I'm part of the Measurement Analytics Lab, or MANTIS, and the Conrad Blucher Institute for surveying there. My major is Coastal Marine System Sciences, and my work focuses largely on using remote sensing data sets to try to survey different coastal processes. I work in really close collaboration with the Apalachicola National Estuarine Research Reserve off the coast of Florida, and we ultimately try to figure out ways in which we can use remote sensing data to better help and support their monitoring efforts out there. And I'm excited to be here today and talk about how GlobalMapper helps me do this. So I've been using GlobalMapper about 3.5 years now, and I found that it's just such a powerful tool to help me with my research looking at coastal processes. One of the ways I use it is for terrestrial LiDAR filtration. So the Mantis and Conrad Blucher Institute go out to the research reserve I just spoke about and conduct annual surveys there where they collect UAS imagery as well as that terrestrial LiDAR. And it's an easy way for me to use the LiDAR module, import that, and filter it as needed to further conduct analyses, as well as data visualization and manipulation. So oftentimes with elevation models, I'll see that there's a strong vertical bias. So that allows me to easily correct that if I need to. And then finally, in the past couple of years, my work has focused largely on how to use GIS and remote sensing data to quantify hurricane impacts. And the workflow I've developed for that continues to be used to monitor the short-term recovery of the study area. And my focus specifically looks at how Hurricane Michael impacted the beach and fore-dune system at Little St. George Island, which is a barrier island off the coast of Florida. Hurricane Michael actually made landfall about 50 to 60 kilometers west of St. George Island in 2018, but it made landfall as a Category 5 storm. So it still had really severe impacts on the island itself. And I'm going to move forward today and just kind of talking about how I've used GlobalMapper in order to do this research and quantify the results. Beginning with, of course, I use it for point cloud filtration, as well as to generate elevation models, which allow us to kind of see right away where do we see erosion occurring, where do we see accretion. We use the volumetric change detection tool in order to quantify that further. And then also extracting information to determine how did the fore-dune crest and toe change as well. And why GlobalMapper? I'll talk about this a little bit more throughout my presentation, but truly it's just been so powerful in terms of working with big data for me. It's fast. I really like that compared to other GIS software and other software I've used in general. It's really nice to have such ease of visualization. So in terms of filtering and viewing everything, it's just a great way to visualize what's going on and see what you're doing and work with the data efficiently. And I'm going to start moving into the methodology by discussing the data I'm actually working with. So I mentioned earlier that A&M Corpus Christi, both the Measurement Analytics Lab and Conrad Blucher Institute go out to the research reserve at least annually to conduct surveys there. So they're collecting terrestrial LiDAR surveys as well as high-resolution imagery with the UAS platform. We have a SenseFlight EV Plus that we use and a Wingter 1. So ultimately, we use those in order to collect overlapping images. And then those overlapping images are import into Pix4D in order to process them using structure from motion photogrammetry, which is essentially a way to use two-dimensional overlapping images to generate a three-dimensional model, or what we call point cloud. So it creates these really large point clouds, oftentimes over 500 million points of the entire island, that have very high densities, around 300 points per square meter in the case of point clouds I'm often working with for this particular project. And I also use this data in conjunction with elevation models that are acquired from airborne LiDAR data by the Corps of Engineers. So those also allow me to see post-storm conditions in this case. And then the next step would be to import the point clouds into GlobalMapper to be filtered. So these are the point clouds that are generated from using structure for motion with those overlapping images taken with the UAS. And there are a lot of challenges associated with isolating ground points in this particular environment. And the biggest challenge I encountered was there's just really no way to change parameter values to apply the automatic ground filter to work well for the entirety of the scene. So it might work in the back dunes where there's higher vegetation, but what I was experiencing is on the beach and for the foredunes, applying a ground filter would ultimately end up taking out way too many points and getting rid of true ground points. As well as there's often noise on the shoreline because structure for motion's often not great at mapping water features, and there might be gaps on the beach as well. So you can see that in these images here. But ultimately the workflow that ended up working was to clip terrain types. So I just separately clipped out the back dune region from the foredune region, and I could apply filters separately to those. So that includes an automatic ground filter for the back dunes, as well as applying a noise filter and elevation thresholds. And it did a pretty good job of then isolating ground points for me. And GlobalMapper was great for this because I had also tried working with other software in order to do this, but you cannot visualize the results right away. So what's great about GlobalMapper is I can apply these results, immediately see what that actually looks like and if it's working, and continue to tweak the parameters and again work toward what seems to be the best thing to do. And I'm going to go ahead and play this fly-through video here. It shows you post noise and threshold filtration for the beach and foredunes. And you'll see here that it did a really good job. I ended up going back and just trying to clean up the shoreline a little bit more, as well as there were just a couple regions of vegetation I had to manually clip out, but it did a really good job. And then once I have those point clouds filtered in a way I'm happy with and I was consistent with, I would then generate elevation models within GlobalMapper of those filtered point clouds, again focusing on just ground points. And there's a tool, you simply create elevation grid, and I would produce these at 0.1 meter resolution for the UAS derived point clouds. And it's because they're just such high resolution. And the elevation model I use that's derived from airborne LiDAR are 1 meter models, but because the point clouds are so dense, it allows us to actually get results at 0.1 meter resolution. And you can see here the elevation models in this image allow you to really get a good look at what the foredune system looks like, as well as the back dunes there. All right, and then once I have all the elevation models, I'm happy with them. Typically the first step I'll take is to go ahead and use the combine and compare terrain layers tool in GlobalMapper. And ultimately this kind of acts as just a raster calculator. So what I can do is difference the two elevation models, one representing conditions before the hurricane made landfall and the other one representing conditions right afterwards. And it will show me essentially an output, a new raster, looking at the different elevation changes there. So again, this allows me to kind of get an easy to visualize and see, look at where patterns of accretion are happening, where's erosion happening. And then also something I typically do is generate contours for both of the elevation models to get a look at how those have changed and how elevation is changing between the two models. And finally, a tool that they have that I'm really enjoying is the 3D profile path tool. So you can ultimately create any transect or line feature, and if you select that, whatever elevation model is selected, it will actually create a path profile for you. So you can see on the left, their image, there is a transect I've generated, and then on the right, that's the corresponding path profile. And what it ultimately shows you is elevation elevation along the distance of the transect. And this also kind of allows you to get a good look at maybe how the foredune system has changed and slopes. So this is the output model, just a segment of the island that I'm showing you from looking at the differences utilizing their combine and compare terrain layer tool. So this is representing that elevation change for this is the western segment of the island. And you can see in the legend there, sorry, it's a little small, but ultimately the negative values are represented by the greens and blues here. And you kind of see that line going straight across the island there, as well as a large portion of that westernmost segment there is green and blue. So that actually represents where we're seeing erosion, and that was the foredune system. So the foredune system really took a heavy hit from the hurricane. You'll notice that there are general trends of accretion on both the beach and behind the foredune system in the back dunes. Likely a lot of that was sediment received from the dunes being eroded during the storm. But you'll notice there too, on the upper right hand corner, you'll see that's a zoomed in segment of the western portion there. And you'll notice how essentially, again, the foredunes were really destroyed during this storm. And it looks like even inundation could have occurred there. And now moving into volumetric changes. So GlobalMapper makes this step incredibly easy. What I ultimately end up doing is working with a baseline that's already pre-established, or you can create essentially any baseline you want, and you can cast and create transects in order to then generate polygons to look at volumetric change. So if you're wanting to look at back dunes versus the foredunes and beach, you can do that. Or if there's any particular segment of a study area you're interested in, you can clip it and create a transect to look just at that. But for the purposes of my study, I use both 100-meter bins along shore and 10-meter wide bins in order to determine volumetric changes. So this is just going to tell me how did the volume change between my two elevation models. And I use their measure volume between two surfaces tool. It's incredibly easy, so you just input both of your elevation models of interest, and then it will populate results per transect. So you can actually look at the entire thing, or you can determine these different statistics per transect. And the populated results, I created a list of some of them on the right there. So this includes total volumetric changes, the net volumetric change, what was the average, minimum, and maximum elevation changes, as well as accretion and erosion, and it gives you that both in terms of volume as well as the area. And then from that, you can also determine the average volumetric change per area. So those are all really great, powerful results to have from this easy-to-use tool. These are just some example results from the volumetric change analysis. So I have two maps there. On the top, you can see the net volumetric change from the impact period. So that was the impact of Hurricane Michael. And then also looking at the recovery period, you can see that below there. So it shows you the net volume in cubic meters. For the purposes of publication, I'm also trying to look at the western versus the eastern segment of the island. So having all those transects allows me to populate statistics for that. And you can also see a change in elevation, or the average change in elevation along shore. Finally, moving into using GlobalMapper to extract foredune crest and toe. So I generated transects that were 10 meters apart along shore for the entirety of the island. And for each transect, I extracted elevation data at every 1 meter distance along the transect. Dune crest was identified as the highest point of elevation along the transect, and then the dune toe was the maximum change in slope. Now, on the beach, sometimes there were steep changes in slope that were clearly not the dune toe. So because of this, I was actually able to clip out a large segment of the beach and the back dunes to ensure that that would not skew my dune toe results. And then I was also able to manually check them. But ultimately, each object ID for the transect also corresponds to elevation that was extracted from each transect. So I was able to export that and just use Power Query in Excel in order to identify the dune crest in tow and its distance along the transect for each transect. These are some of the results from that analysis. So you can see up in the top left, that just shows us the dune crest elevation along the entirety of the island for the pre-storm elevation model versus the impact. So it allows us to see, especially on the western segments of the island and then the far eastern, how much that elevation was impacted by Hurricane Michael, as well as similarly to the volumetric changes, kind of looking at statistics western versus eastern segments of the island, and the path profiles for just a sampled transect were pulled from the pre-storm elevation model versus that of the post-storm. So you can see that on the bottom as well, how it's a more gradual slope following the storm, and the elevation goes from 4.01 meters at that particular spot to 3.14 meters. So in conclusion here, GlobalMapper has really allowed me to streamline this process for my research and develop these workflows that make my life easier. It makes my research more efficient, and I really like that the software is so user-friendly. And because of all these things, I'm sure you realize and know that as you progress in research, oftentimes things need to be changed. And for that reason, it's easy to do using GlobalMapper. It's also been very, very powerful for processing the big data and manipulating the big data that I'm working with. And then in the future, I hope to only learn more ways that this software can help and benefit my research. So checking out different tools such as pixels to points and the advanced filtration techniques, trying to explore that a little bit more within the LiDAR module. I want to say thank you so much for your time and for joining me for the presentation today. If there are any questions, I would be happy to answer them now if possible, and if not, you can always contact me at kschwind@islander.tamucc.edu, as well as I'd be happy to provide more information on our lab, and I would like to go ahead and thank the project's collaborators and sponsors there.
Okay, thank you, Kelsey. Interesting, again, from a different perspective, looking at GlobalMapper in a practical context for more research-oriented work. We had a couple of questions specifically come in about the pixels to points tool. I'm glad she put that plug in at the end. When she was conducting that research, she wasn't obviously using pixels to points for that photogrammetric structure from motion process, simply because she wasn't aware of it at the time. So needless to say, she is now. Our next presenter, we will go a little bit long, by the way. Hopefully that will not impact your schedule. Got a couple of interesting presentations coming up. Shifting our focus a little bit to a community college. Richard Friedman, as I mentioned during the start, a long-time user of GlobalMapper, very experienced with GlobalMapper, working at the San Juan College in Farmington, New Mexico. Spent 35 years working in computer information technology and archaeology, including GIS, GPS, and remote sensing. He's participated in several archaeological projects, utilizing, again, GPS, GIS, photogrammetry, LiDAR, remote sensing, working with the Navajo Nation, National Park Service, University of Colorado, BLM, Bureau of Land Management, NASA, a number of other organizations as well. So a lot of experience in a professional context, in a teaching context. He is the adjunct instructor for GIS and technology in San Juan College, as I mentioned. Been teaching there since 2005. His teaching role has recently expanded to include the new SUAS program. That's a small unmanned aerial systems, obviously very relevant to the way our software is evolving. And as I mentioned, he's a long-time GlobalMapper user. So once again, let me go ahead and switch over to Richard's presentation.
Thank you, and I'll just briefly go over the use of GlobalMapper at San Juan College in Farmington, New Mexico. As a side note, I've been a GlobalMapper user since about 1996. So it's kind of been my Swiss Army knife of GIS, especially when it comes to imagery and elevation data, LiDAR data. And I was really enthused when we were able to incorporate this into our our program at San Juan College. And why GlobalMapper? It's number one, a really great tool, but also it's really easy for GIS and non-GIS professionals to use. And as a community college, we end up with a lot of our students being either they're getting their certificate or their associates. In addition to, they might already have a bachelor's in biology or geology or some other profession where they're gathering field data and they need to present that information. We have students who are working on their GIS degree just for GIS, looking for an associate's. And now we've got students who are looking at getting either an associate's or a certificate in small unmanned aerial systems, or we also get a lot of students who are part of the engineering program. So they're either looking for a certificate or an associate's as an engineering technician, or they're doing a pre-engineering program. So we have quite a wide cross-section of students, and GlobalMapper really fits into it as a tool that they can use once they get out of school, that's fairly inexpensive and pretty comprehensive as far as what you can do with it. Just a wide variety of uses for GlobalMapper. It integrates easily into GIS and CAD workflows. So depending on if they're in the engineering part of things, then they can integrate the products from GlobalMapper into their CAD-based workflows, or if they're in GIS, they can integrate it into GIS, or they can use it specifically by itself for any of these products. I think it's just a real well-rounded tool that allows greater flexibility for the students once they get out of school to be able to integrate geospatial technologies into their particular workflow or application. It's very easy to manipulate elevation data, so it's not uncommon, especially in our part of the world, because there's a lot of federal land. So if you're doing work on federal lands, some sort of compliance work, usually they want everything in metric units, or if you're doing archaeology, anything like that. However, if you're working with an engineering firm or with a surveying firm or local government, they typically want things in English units, in feet and inches. So GlobalMapper allows you to change the different units, both on the elevation data and in the projection, extremely easily. It's fast to reproject images in elevation data. So the same issue of needing something, say, in UTM, which is pretty standard for, say, the Bureau of Land Management, which is the big federal agency here in northwestern New Mexico, or if you're working with a local government where you need to have things in state plane coordinates, so you can move back and forth with the data, or you can take data that often comes, say, if you're dealing with 10-meter DEMs, the standard DEMs from the USGS, and you need that in some real-world projection because it often comes as latitude, longitude, so you need it in an actual projection, some sort of planar coordinate system to do analysis on it. GlobalMapper allows you to do that. It has great support for DSM and DTM creation from LiDAR data. So that's a huge plus if you're integrating LiDAR data to any of your workflows or point cloud data. GlobalMapper really, it handles it so well and so easily. It's kind of, it's a no-brainer no-brainer to use it. It's kind of a pain not to use it. And then LiDAR analysis, classification, and editing of data with the LiDAR module. We've integrated a lot of LiDAR into our program now, since it is a fairly common format. And even if students aren't going to actually be editing the data once they get out, GlobalMapper, using it helps them to understand what's in the data, how it's created, and what to expect from it when they do get out of the program. And of course, the pixels to points in our SUAS program is a fantastic tool. Again, it gives the students something that is really cost effective once they get out, if they want to, if they're in an industry or a job where photogrammetry with drones is something that they will be doing or something they will be supporting. It gives them that experience with the photogrammetric processes before they get out, so they understand what's going on. The course is where we integrate GlobalMapper into the program, geospatial analysis, specifically viewshed, watershed, and path and profile creation. So they're getting a real basic introduction in geospatial analysis to elevation data, both DEMs, digital elevation models, digital surface models, and digital terrain models, so they can begin to understand how these can be used and how they're used to generate data and analysis products. The SUAS piloting and data acquisition, that we just do a real basic introduction to photogrammetry. Again, the pixels to points tool within the LiDAR module is fantastic for this. It's really easy for the students to grasp what's going on, and that I think is really the beauty of GlobalMapper. Is the interface is easy, it's easy to use. Students aren't struggling with what button do I push when. They're dealing more with the products, and that allows them to understand what's going on with the product rather than what do I do to get my final product. We also do a little bit of georeferencing, just so that again they can understand what's going on with georeferencing. And in the SUAS program, we have students who are not really into GIS. We get students who are more interested in videography, or just in providing the flight services, flying the small unmanned aerial systems for a company. And this gives them that introduction to data products that they'll be creating, so they better understand how they can create it. And GlobalMapper, since they aren't so focused on trying to get the tool to work, they're more focused on what the product is and what's going on with the tool. And then an introduction to LiDAR data. That's just kind of one of my philosophies, is the LiDAR and point cloud data is only going to continue to be a huge part of any geospatial application, and so understanding that, getting an introduction to it, is really important. In the SUAS mapping course, we use GlobalMapper quite a bit more. We use it to do the complete photogrammetric project workflow. So they learn from creating a project using something like DroneLink or Maps Made Easy or one of the other products out there for creating a mapping project with their SUAS, all the way through to getting the final products out of GlobalMapper from using the points to pixels, and also the LiDAR module for doing classification on the data. And we use it for data visualization too. So they've got not only just a planimetric product, but a 3D product that they could show clients or prospective employers. And in geographic imaging, it's a pretty big part of that. We do some cut and fill analysis. We do LiDAR data processing, both automatic and manual classification. Again, the whole idea here is to get them to understand what's in the data and how to use that data, and manual or LiDAR data editing. And by the time they're done, they understand what this point cloud is, what's in it, and also what they might expect if they're getting point clouds delivered to them from a service provider. So the data we typically use might be classified with low noise, high noise, ground and non-ground points, and then we go in and clean that up and make it a better product. And then 3D data visualization again, so that they understand this whole 3D aspect of everything. This is just a sample of a project that we did in the geographic imaging course. This is in Mesa Verde National Monument, which is only about an hour and a half's drive from where we are. And this is basic classified data, so it's gone through an automatic classification process. You've got high noise, low noise, ground, and non-ground points. In this exercise, we've got several things to look at. The original data, since we've got cliffs here, automatic classifiers aren't real good at picking out the edges of cliffs. So we've got the edges of the cliffs are missing. So we have them go in and do the edges of the cliffs, as well as the buildings are missing. So they're classified as non-ground points, but not as buildings. So we do have them go back in and classify the buildings. In this case, they're showing up. So we've got, when they created this final product, the idea is to show the buildings and the ground points in the final data set. So we've got the buildings, and then along the cliff edge, here's another focus to get that cleaned up to where we've actually got the data that should be there. We aren't clipping off the ends of the cliffs or the edges of the cliffs. This is just a real quick example of a final project that was done for the SUAS mapping course this last spring. And in this, for the participants in this group, we had people who were looking at doing the SUAS, getting a SUAS associate's degree, and their focus is, learning how to use this to provide services for people. We had people who were biologists looking at this for doing field work, this technology, and we also had several engineering and pre-engineering students. So we had a wide cross-section, and this is just the area they were looking at, just to do a general, ultimately to create a handout or a little booklet that you hand the golfers. The golfers could give all the statistics and the topographic mapping, all that for your holes. They did the first hole on the golf course. This is the team members, and this is slightly reformatted, but this is the presentation that was provided by the group. And you can see here in the software they use GlobalMapper. That was a big part of it. DroneLink was one of the tools they used to create the mapping flights. Autel, their mapping utility within their software, was one of them. QGIS is a product that they use to create final maps, and AutoCAD. Again, since we had people across all different segments, and GlobalMapper too. So it integrated into everybody's workflow, did everything all the different participants in the project needed, and was really a good example of how GlobalMapper can be used. So all the processing was done with GlobalMapper. They used the pixels to points tool to make the digital elevation models, the orthophotos, and 3D views, as well as exporting to QGIS and AutoCAD. An example of the AutoCAD layout that was done. A typical, what an engineering firm might be looking for with this. This is a video, and I think it's important to keep in mind here, this was their first real project on their own. You can see over on the right there's some holes in the data, but it does really well. And this is the video. First time ever creating a video. This was done by one of the students who's in the engineering associates program, the engineering tech. And this is an example of what one of the pages in the handout might be for, or the booklet for providing golfers at San Juan Country Club. And finally, this is an example of one of the in-class projects where it's an area fairly close to Farmington where they use GlobalMapper, the pixels to points tool, to make orthophoto, a DEM, contour data, and export that out to QGIS and make a map. And with that, thank you, and I'd like to also thank Blue Marble Geographics for giving us a chance to, or an opportunity to speak here and show everybody what kind of how we're using GlobalMapper and why we think it's such a valuable tool for education. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Richard. GlobalMapper for golf course management. There's one I wouldn't have thought about. Let me see if I'm sharing my screen. There we go. We'll get it back. I know we've overshot the top of the hour. Hopefully your schedule will allow you to stick around for one more. This is a short one. Richard's case study or story was interesting because he focused on the idea that GlobalMapper is a GIS tool that's ideally suited for maybe students who are not in a GIS program. As you saw at the end, that fly-through video created in GlobalMapper can be created by somebody who has no experience. So that is one of the kind of defining characteristics of the application, is it eliminates those technical barriers for folks who maybe are not focused on this technology. Our final presenter, Santiago Medina from Argentina, a native of Buenos Aires, infantry officer in the Argentine Army, graduated from the country's military college. After leaving the Army, this is the interesting part, he studied as a mountain guide. Those of you familiar with the terrain of Western Argentina, you're up against the Andes there. And he's a teacher, remote sensing and GIS specialist. So an interesting combination. He currently works as a mountain guide for Argentina Extrema and is an online content specialist for the YouTube channel GlobalMapper Class South America, which I have to do some research on. But he does a lot of teaching on the creation of topographic maps to students, and we thought it would be very interesting. That's a little bit of a non-traditional education application that Santiago shared a little bit about what he's doing. So our final presentation, and again, this is a short one. Let me go ahead and bring that one up, and we will hear from Santiago.
Hi to all, how are you? Thanks for the invitation to share how I have been using GlobalMapper in my classes and for personal use. The first time that I realized that I needed to use a GIS software was in 2012 when I was planning to ascend an Argentinian mountain and I needed a topographic map to plan my route. I had several choices, but I chose GlobalMapper because it's a very intuitive software and easy to use. After that trip, I started to learn by myself how to use all the tools that GlobalMapper offers, the possibility to work with online sources, raster files, vector files, and so on. Of all the service that GlobalMapper offers, the best tool for mountaineers are the DEM, because with DEMs we can create contours to know the minimum and maximum spot elevations point, and by knowing that, decide the least dangerous route for our crossing. Also, the DEMs allow us create a path profile and get to know and analyze the slopes. During 8 years, I was professor at Instituto Superior Andes del Sur, one of the most important mountain guide schools in Argentina. My class was named Orientation and Cartography, and I taught my students how to create their own topographic maps with GlobalMapper. Maybe you don't know, but in Argentina there is no update topographic maps of the mountain area. That's why the idea and need to teach how to create topographic maps arose. My students learn to work with raster files, vector files, and the online sources. For example, they learn to choose a mountain zone to download the satellite image of that zone to obtain the DEMs and create the contour lines and watershed, then customize the symbols, edit the map legend, edit the elevation legend, create a path using the digitizer tools, and then generate a path profile. Finally, to work with the map layout editor where they can add text and image elements and grid types. I have taught my students how to rectify, scan all topographic maps, and then how to start to design their own topographic maps. Nowadays, I am using GlobalMapper to work with remote sensing related to the environment, and I would like to share with all workflow with which I have been working. Okay, in this workflow you can see the Aconcagua Provincial Park. You can see the different type of glaciers, and you can see each one of the camps. And the goal of this workflow is to check if one of the camps is located over a glacier. Thanks to GlobalMapper, I detected that the only camp of this type is the Plaza de Mulas base camp. You can see that in the workspace. So once I finish with this work, I will use the map layout editor to create the maps of the workflow. That is all. I want to thank Rachel and David for this opportunity to share my experience with you all. If you want, you can follow me on Instagram at Santiago L. Medina, and if you are planning to climb the Aconcagua someday, you can send me an email to santiagolmedina@gmail.com. Thank you very much. Bye bye.
Thank you, Santiago. Very interesting. Again, teaching GlobalMapper to students for the purpose of making them safe in the mountains. Again, another interesting example of GlobalMapper in an educational context. We overshot by a little bit more than we were expecting, but hopefully those presentations gave you a little bit of insight into how GlobalMapper works in an academic situation. Thank you to all of our presenters. The questions that were asked, we will make sure you get them. Again, in the few minutes we have remaining, if you have any additional questions, pop them in that questions panel. We'll include contact information for our speakers in the follow-up follow-up email you will receive along with the notification of the availability of the video. I know some of you had technical issues today. I apologize for that. Hopefully our recording will be intact and you can see the full presentations in that recorded version. A couple of notes on my final screen here. If you have any questions on GlobalMapper licensing orders at bluemarblegeo.com, any technical questions, we didn't actually do any demos ourselves, but any technical questions arising from what you saw today, GeoHelp is our tech support crew. Probably most appropriately in this slide is the final URL there, bluemarblegeo.com/academic programs. Some people have been asking about the academic labs. You'll find information there about that. Next week's workshop, go ahead and sign up for that. Information there as well. The scholarship noted on there as well. So bluemarblegeo.com/academic programs is where you'll find all of that information. Thank you all for taking the time today to listen to and attend our presentation, and we will speak to you on our next GeoTalks Express session. Thank you.